2 Kings chapter 7. This is really a fascinating story. And there's a lot of things that could be said, I guess, in a chapter like this. If we said all that needed to be said, we'd be here all night long. But I think you'll see what I mean as we go. But 2 Kings chapter 7, it says, Then Elisha said, and I guess let me just interject very quickly. Remember, it's been a couple weeks, but when we looked at the end of chapter 6, this is during a siege. The Syrians have sieged Samaria. And I don't want to rehash all of it. You can go read the end of chapter 6 again, but things have gotten so bad, no food. People are doing unspeakable things because there is no food, right? And so that's an important context for this chapter. And so then Elisha said, Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. And then the Lord, on whose the king, whose hand the king leaned, answered the man of God, and he said, Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And he said, Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof. And there were 4 leprous men at the entering of the end of the gate, and they said one to another, Why sit we here until we die? If we say we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city, we shall die there. And if we sit still here, we would die also. Now therefore come and let us fall into the hand of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live. If they kill us, we shall but die. And they rose up in the twilight to go into the camp of the Syrians. And when they were come to the uttermost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there. For the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and a noise of horses, even the noises of great hosts. And they said one to another, Lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us. Wherefore they arose and they fled in the twilight, and they left their tents and their horses and their asses, even the camp as it was, and fled for the life. And when these lepers came into the uttermost part of the camp, they went into one tent, and they did eat, and they drank, and they carried then silver and gold and raiment, and they went and hid it, and they came again, and they entered into another tent, and they carried this also, and they went and hid it. And then they said one to another, We do not well. This is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now therefore come that we may go and tell the king's household. And so they came and they called into the port of the city, and they told them, saying, We come to the camp of the Syrians, and behold, there was no man there, neither voice of man, but horses tied and asses tied in the tents as they were. And he called the porters, and they told it to the king's house within. And the king arose in the night, and he said unto his servants, I will now show you what the Syrians have done to us. They know that we be hungry. Therefore they are gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the field, saying, When they come out of the city, we shall catch them alive and get into the city. And one of the servants answered, and they said, Let some take, I pray thee, 5 of the horses that remain, which are left in the city. And then it says, Behold, they are as all the multitude of Israel that are left in it. Behold, I say they are even as all the multitude of Israel that are consumed. And let us send and see. They took therefore 2 chariot horses, and the king sent after the host of the Syrians, saying, Go and see. And they went after them unto Jordan, and lo, all the way was full of garments and vessels, which the Syrians had cast away in their haste. And the messengers returned, and they told the king, and the people went out and spoiled the tents of the Syrians. And so a measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. And the king appointed the Lord on whose hand he leaned to have the charge at the gate. And the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died. As the man of God had said, when he spake, who spake when the king came down to him. And it came to pass, as the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 measures of barley for a shekel, and a measure of fine flour for a shekel shall be tomorrow about this time in the gate of Samaria. And that Lord answered the man of God, and said, Now behold, if the Lord should make a window in heaven, might such things be? And he said, Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but shalt not eat thereof. And so it fell out unto him, for the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died. And so, as I said, we are in the midst of this siege. Now, we don't know how long it's been going on, but long enough that, again, not to rehash everything we talked about last chapter, but long enough that people were literally selling dung and the heads of donkeys at exorbitant prices for people to have something to eat, right? That's how bad things had gotten. The famine had gotten to this degree, and it's really important that we understand it, because it's in the midst of that circumstance that Elisha tells the king, listen, here's what's going to happen. By this time tomorrow, not only is there going to be food, but by this time tomorrow, this food is going to be sold at these incredibly low prices. So the only way to take that is that not only is the siege going to be over, but the siege is going to be over, and there's going to be such a surplus of food that the food will be sold at these incredibly low prices. And so that's what causes this man, and we never get his name, but the man, it says on, the king is leaning on, he's some kind of higher up in the king's court. And he said, if God opened the windows of heaven, how could that possibly take place? And you can understand, whereas we don't condone what he said in his mindset, you can understand where it came from. Because what he's thinking, again, he's looking around and seeing the people. We'll see here in a little while. It's not just the people. The horses are so ravished. Everything's dying. Nothing is going as it should. There's no food to speak of. And so in his mind, he's thinking, for that to happen, not only even if the Syrians right now, even if the Syrians picked up and left, to say that this is going to take place by this time tomorrow would be impossible, right? We have to import food. Obviously, we don't have time to grow it. We'd have to import food. And so by this time tomorrow, not only has the enemy have left, but we have imported so much food that the prices are going to plummet, right? And so again, he's trying to, and he does what so many people do, and this is a common fallacy, and you have to be careful of this, is that he's trying to put God in a human box. He's trying to put God, who is sovereign and almighty and outside of humanity, he's trying to place human restrictions upon an almighty God. And that's not something you can do. And so this man, he just couldn't fathom that this prophecy of Elisha could possibly ever come true. It was, I'm sure probably we're laughing at Elisha as he's telling this. And so Elisha says, by this time tomorrow, he says, people are going to see it. You will see it, but you're not going to partake of it. You'll see it with your eyes, but you won't get to experience the blessing of it. And so these two prophecies obviously take place later on in the chapter. But this is another test of God. It's another a time where God is putting his name on the line, right? Because again, Elisha doesn't say, hey, here's what I think is going to happen. No, again, verse 1, what does he say? Hear the word of the Lord. And then he doubles down on this. Thus saith the Lord, right? This isn't Elisha speaking. This is God speaking. And so again, he's putting God's name upon the line. And so this man's lack of faith, this man's disbelief would lead to his own downfall, as it does, unfortunately, for so many people. And then we get this very fascinating story. And this is the part I was talking about. We could say just so much about these lepers and what they experienced and what they end up doing. But it's such a fun, interesting story here. And so these four lepers, they're sitting in the gate of the city, and they're looking around, and they just kind of rationalize everything. And also keep in mind the fact that these men are castaways in a city that is dying by famine, right? They're lepers, but they're not even part of the normal population, right? They're castaways being lepers. So they're out on their own, and they're looking at the city on one hand, they're looking at the army at the other hand, and they say, if we go into the city, there's no food, we're going to die. If we stay here, there's no food and we're going to die. If we go to the Syrians, maybe they'll show us some mercy, and maybe they don't. If they don't, we're going to die, right? And so as far as they're concerned, it is a win-win. Either we're going to go to the Syrians, they're going to show us some mercy, give us some food, give us some shelter, whatever the case may be, or they put us out of our misery a whole lot faster than it would be just suffering to death by famine, right? And so in the minds of these lepers, there's nothing to lose. There's honestly nothing to lose for them to go. And so they leave and they go out into the camp of the Syrians, and they find the absolute unexpected. And so obviously they expected an army, because that's what has been the case. Again, we're not told how long, but I think we can safely assume for several months, right? I mean, if this is any time in this particular day and time, when you were planning a siege, this was not a short-term military tactic, right? If you were planning a siege, you're planning to be there for months upon months, because you have to cut them off. They have to use up the stores that they have in the city, and then that's when things start to get difficult, right? And so this is a long-term thing. And so they're expecting to see the army, as they probably had every day for several months by this point. And they go out, and there's nothing. There's tents. There's no people, right? And so obviously they're taken aback. They don't know what has happened. And it's at this particular point in the story where we get some inside information that they don't have. And so we're told what happened in verse 6. And so it says that the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and a noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said to one another, Lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the kings of the Hittites, the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us. And so the Syrians think somehow, we don't know how, somehow the king of Israel has snuck somebody out of the city, gotten word to both the Hittites and the Egyptians, has somehow hired them, right? Somehow he has got the means to employ their services, and he's hired them to come up. And this scared them to such a degree that as soon as they heard this, they don't think clearly. They don't think logistically through this. They don't grab anything. They don't plan an exit. It's like literally wherever they're standing, they just start to run. And they leave behind everything, except for, as we'll see in a second, the things they're literally throwing off on the side of the road as they're running. So there were some vessels and some things that they were throwing that they find later on. And so again, this is a supernatural thing. Obviously, this is a supernatural thing that would cause a fear to a trained army to such a degree that you would just turn and run and leave everything in that particular state. I really like what Matthew Henry said. He said, those that will not fear God, he can make to fear at the shaking of a leaf. And so one thing that I really love as we've gone through First and Second Kings now is the variety of ways in which we have seen God bring victory to the people of Israel. Right? And so the author is consistently showing us, again, the sovereignty of God over his creation. He is not without the means to bring about his will in whatever way he wants to do it. And oftentimes he does it in ways that are completely unexpected to us. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so I like to get a mental picture here. You got these 4 lepers, outcasts. We don't know how long they've had leprosy, but outcasts for that entire time. They thought an hour ago that they were dead, one way or another, dead by famine, dead by the sword, by the Syrian army, whatever. They thought they were dead. And then all of a sudden they have more spoils. They have more food. They have probably more shelter. They have more changes of clothing. They have more than they've probably ever had in their life. And I like the way the text says this. You just see them, verse 7. It's just like they're running from tent to tent, giddy almost, like a kid on Christmas morning, right? They're just running from tent to tent, seeing what they can find. They're grabbing treasure, grabbing food, they're grabbing clothes. That which they can't carry with them, they're going and they're hiding so that they can come back and get it later. Probably these guys have never been happier. And then all of a sudden, and this is just such a wonderful verse, all of a sudden, verse 9, something kicks in. We don't know what exactly leads one of these men to come to this realization. But it's a beautiful realization. And so verse 9, and then they said one to another, we do not well. We do not well. It says, this day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. Let me just say a couple of things about this, because I said we could be here a long, long time. These men, at this particular point in time, even though they were lepers and were castaways, as we talked about, these men at this point in time had everything the people of Samaria needed. They had it. They had it in their fingertips. They had it in their hands. They had the knowledge of it. They had everything that the people of Samaria needed. And for a short time, they were living in it, and they were joyful, and they were really enjoying the blessings, I guess you could say, that had been bestowed upon them by God. And then all of a sudden the realization come to them, they need this just as much as we do. They need this just as much as we do. Even though we've been castaways, we've been the rejected ones, what we have is what they need. And all of a sudden they come to the realization, what we're doing is wrong. This is a day of glad tidings, and we're here holding our peace. We're keeping from people who are literally dying that which would be the sustenance to give them life, right? And so obviously, I don't have to spoon feed this to you. Obviously, you can see the spiritual implications and the actions of these lepers. We have the knowledge of life. This is what we have. We have it. We have what the world needs. There are people out there who are literally dying, and we hold what they need. We have the knowledge. And so we could say to ourselves, Again, if you're not out there doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're not out there being salt and light like the Bible calls us to be, we could say to one another, we're not doing well. This is a day of glad tidings, and we're holding our peace. And so these lepers, these 4 lepers, become a tremendous example. And again, I don't want to sit here and just spiritualize away the text, but there's obvious implications in the actions of these 4 men to what we ought to be doing today as Christians. But again, they tell each other, suppose something bad happens to us tonight, right? Something terrible takes place. Essentially, suppose the information never gets to the people. Here we are, right outside of the city gate. It could be so that if something happened to us, those people would die not knowing the answer was 100 feet away from them, right? And so here's exactly what we need to do. We need to go tell the king, everything that's going on. And I really like the observation of Davis here. He said, the discovery of God's work is placed in the hands of the unclean and the unnamed. Surely we feel this text grabbing us by the lapels and pulling us down to kneel and praise. Here Yahweh uses neither the healthy nor the prominent. Doesn't God deserve high praise for the lowly servants he uses? And this is consistent throughout the scriptures. This is not just here in 2 Kings chapter 7. God consistently calls the people that everybody else would have thought it's never going to be that person. Right? But this is consistently who God chooses to use, because he calls the weak, he calls the lowly, he calls these people because it is in those people where his greatness, his might is most clearly seen. And so this, like I said, this is consistent throughout the scriptures. And so they do this. They go tell the porter, and eventually word gets to the king. And the king at first, again, even though he had the prophecy from Elisha, even though he had a man saying, hey, by the way, by this time tomorrow, all these things are going to happen. And here comes a man with information that would provide the circumstance for that to be true. Right? He refuses to believe it. Again, the prophecy of God seemed too good to be true, and he refused to believe it. And so what he said, this isn't God, this is a trap. The Syrians are trying to trap us. Right? The whole point of a siege is to wait them out. And then things become much easier for you to just kind of waltz in and take the city, right? That's how a siege works. And so the king says they haven't fled. They're hiding. And as soon as we leave to go take all the stuff, they're going to trap us, and then they're going to go into the city. They're just trying to hasten the end of the siege, right? That's what the king thinks. And so somebody, and again, another unnamed person, and we've seen that quite a few times in Kings already, but another unnamed person stands up. He says, well, why don't we at least see? Why don't we at least check to see if what they're saying is true? We have some horses, and he says there in verse 13, the horses are in the same shape we're in. So essentially what he's saying is, if they die, what difference does it make? They're going to die tomorrow probably anyways, right? So let's just take some horses. Let's just go out there and see. And again, I think we get another snippet of how bad things were, because the guy said, let's just take 5. And the implication is, let's just use this small number. We'll just take 5 horses. But they don't even take 5. And I think the insinuation here is there weren't 5 that could do it. That's how bad things were. They only took 2 horses. And so they go out with these 2 horses. And of course, they find that everything was exactly as these men had said. And so they're out there now. And it says that the people of the city, they come out and they spoiled the tents of the Syrians. And so exactly, obviously, the implication, exactly what Elisha said came true. And that's what the last several, 3 or 4 or 5 verses of the chapter, that's what it's really hinting, or not hinting, it's really bringing this point home, because it repeats the prophecies, it repeats the fulfillments. It really wants us to get and to understand exactly what Elisha said came to pass. And so, the 2 main things, that all the food would be sold at a low price. And that's exactly what happened. And so not only was the siege over, because the Syrians had fled, and so the victory had come to Israel or Samaria, the siege was over, but the prices of food plummeted as they now had the spoils of war, right? They now had all the food that was keeping the Syrian army. And by the way, let me just say this again. The Syrians had planned for this to be a long time. And the reason I say that is that means they had planned to bring with them a lot of food. They had to have a lot of food on them to feed their army so that their army can outlast the people of Samaria. And so, again, we're not told how much, but there was such a surplus of food that literally in an instant, they go from people scraping all the money they can together to go buy the head of a donkey to boil and eat, to now you could go down to the market and get a bag of flour for a penny. That's just how literally in an instant, how things change. And again, this is all according to the word of, God through Elisha. And then secondly, obviously, this one man who doubted, he stood in disbelief at the message of God. And Elisha told him, "You'll see it, but you won't experience. You'll understand that the blessings of God have come, but you won't be able to partake of the blessings of God." We're told that the king, that Jehoram makes him, he places him in the gate, right? And so as the people are, for reasons that are so obvious, so overcome with joy that the siege is over and there's actual food now, right? They're rushing through the gate, and as they rush through the gate, they literally trample that man to death. And so you can again, the language of Elisha was so specific. You'll see it. I mean, he's in the gate. It's right there, right? All the spoils of the war were within his sight. He can see it. He can see the joy on the faces of the people as they're rushing out of the gate of the city to go and enjoy those spoils. And then that instant, his life was taken from him. And so I want to close with this. We understand the feet of the people were the means of that man's death, but the reason that man died had nothing to do with people, and it had everything to do with his own disbelief. Right? He doubted the word of God, and that is what caused him to die. And so may we never forget, we've already talked about the sovereignty of God tonight, but may we never forget that we serve a sovereign God who can stop a siege as easily as he can start one, who can give victory over their enemy with a sword and a shield or with a sound. Right? It doesn't matter. God is not without his means. And so we have no reason to doubt or stand in a state of disbelief. And so if you remember the story of the man in the New Testament, he brings his demon-possessed child to Jesus, and Jesus asks him, "Do you believe I can heal this man, or to heal your son?" And the father cries out, he says, "I believe, help thou mine unbelief." And this is a constant state for Christians. Yes, we believe, but you know what? There's times where the doubt comes. There's times where wavering happens. And it's in those times where we stand on our faith. I believe. God, help me in this moment. Help my unbelief. And so here, this man died because of doubt. This man died because of his disbelief. And it's all because, and again, it's so fascinating to me. The words of Elisha, as we have seen, have been proved time and time and time again. And yet, still, people were doubting this prophet. And so many really wonderful and fascinating things here in chapter 7. And we'll continue Elisha's story next week.